You're listening to China Africa Talk.
Jambo, ni Bridget akikuletea kipindi kinachohusiana na China na Afrika.
Vous écoutez le dialogue sino-africain avec Bridget.
Everything China, everything Africa.
Olá, você está ouvindo China Africa Talk com Bridget.
سيداتي وسادتي مرحبا بكم في الحوار الصيني العربي مع بريدجيت.
Welcome back to the program. This is China Africa Talk. I'm your host, Bridget Mutambidwa, coming to you from the Chinese capital in Beijing. And I bring you more discussions on what's happening with China and Africa from a Chinese and African perspective. A new wave of US tariffs takes effect on August the 7th, with 4 African countries, including South Africa, facing some of the steepest increases.
The challenge, of course, might just be automobile sector, which a large part of it does go to the United States.
Lesotho, though spared from the most extreme measures with a revised tariff of 15% down from the initial 50% in April, continues to feel the pressure. Its textile industry, once a cornerstone of the economy, remains under threat.
Has impacted us a lot as Lesotho, especially because textile manufacturing producing for U.S. market has been the backbone of the economy of Lesotho.
Amid rising global trade tensions, experts are also watching China, Africa's largest trading partner. With diplomatic and economic ties to over 200 global economies, China is increasingly seen as a counterweight in the shifting trade landscape.
While the United States is engaged in this tariff war against the rest of the world, including against Africa, China is eliminating any tariff in its trade with African countries, which have established the diplomatic relations.
With the US becoming a less predictable trade partner, how can China and Africa work together to build resilience amid global uncertainty? For more on this discussion, I'm now joined by Victor Gao, Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization, Thembisa Fakude, Senior Research Fellow, Africa-Asia Dialogues in South Africa, and Teboho Kobedi, Managing Director of Afri-Expo Textiles, Lesotho. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Mr. Kobedi, you are Managing Director of Afri-Expo Textiles. You're also a Director of Duty-Free Sourcing, a textile manufacturing company which produces for brands such as Pick n Pay, Mr. Price Sports and Woolworths and many others. Now, how have the recent US trade policies, including tariffs, impacted Lesotho's export industries, particularly in manufacturing?
You know, the tariffs, the US trade policies that brought the new US trade policies that included the tariffs that was just announced by the president a couple of months ago, has impacted us a lot as Lesotho, especially because textile manufacturing producing for U.S. market has been the backbone of the economy of Lesotho. Textile manufacturing has been the second largest employer after government. So you can imagine the impact that was caused by that announcement. Mm-hmm. So it became as a shock, and we just said to ourselves, is it the second type or is it another type of COVID that is coming to us? And then why Lesotho among all other countries and all those things? So, but well, it is what it is. Mm-hmm. We stood up, we met together as government, as business, manufacturers, met our employees and trade unions. Yeah, everybody, all the stakeholders, we had to put our heads together to see what is it that now we have to do, especially looking at other markets, but also considering the laying off the staff.
Professor Gao, with ongoing trade tensions and tariff deadlines approaching, how does China view the prospects for dialogue and de-escalation?
Thank you very much for having me. First of all, ever since the beginning of the Trump administration, and especially since April the 2nd, the United States has launched what I call anti-China tariff war, as well as anti-the world tariff war against almost all the countries in the world. Now, as far as China is concerned, China's position has been clear and consistent from the very beginning. That is to open the door as wide as possible if the United States wants to talk about how to end or reduce the tariff war, or China will fight till the very end if the United States wants to impose the trade war on China. Therefore, China has been engaging with the United States 3 times already in Geneva, in London, in Stockholm. But it seems that the United States keeps changing its goalpost from one place to another and keeps inserting more extraneous things into the so-called tariff discussion. And I think China will keep its determination and be very focused on doing the right thing, because I personally believe the anti-China, anti-the world trade war or the tariff war launched by the United States is an unjustified war. It is actually throwing a big wedge into free trade. And eventually it will be a blow to everyone involved, including to the people in the United States. So China rises up to the occasion to defend free trade, and free trade is something worthwhile for all the countries to defend. And it is such an unfortunate thing that the United States government chooses to put so much pressure on free trade and try to destroy, if not significantly damage, free trade as the rest of the world understands it. And this is not a good moment for the United States. It is a devastating moment for the rest of the world. And I hope we will all do the right thing to defend free trade.
Let's move over to Mr. Fakude there in South Africa. Now, what would be the broader economic implications of the US tariffs on South Africa, particularly in trade, investment, and employment?
Well, the United States is number 3 largest trading partner with South Africa, and our exports to the United States are in single digits. So, yes, it's going to have an impact to an extent in terms of our business, but it's not really going to cripple us. That's the first point. The second point is we have alternative markets that are looking for our products, particularly China. China has since dropped all the tariffs to all African countries but one. So China is a market that continues to consume, and I think that's likely to be our next market, particularly when it comes to consumable goods that we export, agricultural goods that we export. The challenge, of course, might just be automobile sector, which a large part of it does go to the United States, but we also have an alternative of sending all of what we're producing, which is specifically for a specific market, back to Germany, and Germany will have a market. And thirdly, there are other alternative ways of bypassing these tariffs in terms of having deals with other countries that have got lesser tariffs, and those countries can actually be importing from us and then exporting to the United States and applies the law of origin, or we can uproot our, not necessarily for the automobile sector, but other sectors can easily have a situation where goods are manufactured, prepared and processed elsewhere and exported. So there's no desperate moment in South Africa at the moment. And by the way, the negotiations are still carrying on.
Okay.
We're dealing with a very schizophrenic government that changes as it wishes. So I don't think we can tell yet what is to come.
And still on you there, Mr. Fakude, in response to a 30% tariff hike on South African products to the US, South Africa's Department of Trade has introduced new support measures, including an export support desk to help diversify markets. Now, which South African products have strong potential in Asian markets, especially in China?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the relationship between South Africa and China is strong and continues to grow. But China is also have a very charm offensive-based economic posture towards Africa, and this is also going to impact on our geopolitics. So one will say that America has shot itself on the foot in this regard, because every country that's been impacted by these schizophrenic politicking and economics are looking for alternative markets, and the alternative markets in this regard is going to be China, because China has been friendly, open to dealing with countries all over the world, putting politics aside and concentrating mainly on establishing and strengthening brotherhood, including economic activity that's healthy and beneficial to all countries. So you are likely, therefore, to see South Africa, and this is what the president of this country is saying, ministers are saying the same. So there's a softer landing in terms of our turning towards China, whether it's business, politics, or diplomacy. There is a wide acceptance, of course, except for a few parties that have always been traditionally white-dominated parties like the Democratic Alliance. But generally, there is a very positive mood that South Africa must not go and with a begging bowl to the United States. They must look at the markets that are ready to take our products, and we need to concentrate in establishing those relationships and strengthening those relationships.
Okay. But how could existing trade agreements be strengthened to support this shift between South Africa and China? Well, what would your insights be?
Well, there are already a lot of bilaterals and Pan-African arrangements between South Africa and China, and China and South Africa, and Africa and South Africa. So China has managed over the past at least over a decade to establish lines of communication and lines of business between ourselves, that is South Africa and China, and of course the continent and China. So those lines are up and running, and I think it's just a matter of diverting whatever it is that we're doing with the United States into China. But right now, you can't continue trusting the United States. I mean, the country that's governed by executive orders. Today, someone wakes up and say, I'm going to sanction all of you, kick out all of you. So that brings really instability into the business of not only politics, but economics. Donald Trump can't be trusted at the moment because he has decided that he's mixing up everything, diplomacy, politics, and economics. So if you do anything that offends him diplomatically or politically, you are likely to be punished economically. So that in itself is problematic to many countries that really value their independence and value their sovereignty, particularly when it comes to politics.
Mr. Kobedi, what specific challenges have you faced in terms of production, employment, and market access since the tariffs were introduced?
Well, the specific challenges was there were raw materials on transit, production for U.S. market. There were people that were producing for U.S. market in our factories. The men that had left the country for U.S. So there were quite a confusion of what's going to happen now after. But basically, the first one was, because there was going to be a reduction of employment. People have to be laid off from work. Also, the production had to be reduced. And then also we had to look at the other market to get access to other markets, especially the close by, because we didn't know what will be the reaction of other overseas countries.
Have you had to adjust your supply chains, your product lines, or staffing in response? And what strategies have helped you stay afloat?
Yeah, well, I must say, before the tariffs got in action, we were already having some relationships with the close by South African retailers. And then we were, it wasn't that difficult because, like I'm saying, this was a global challenge. And then it was easier also to talk to the close by markets and then say, guys, here we are, this is the capacity that is available. And then how can we work together, things like that. Because also these tariffs were not like it was meant for Lesotho. It was a global problem, a global challenge. So even the Americans themselves were affected because they are the ones that has to bear the cost. And then it meant a shrink. But the strategy that we took was to get to the closed markets like the South African retailers and then forge the strong relationships and then make ourselves available to them so that we can keep going.
Professor Gao, China is Africa's largest trading partner, and China sustains broad trade relations with over 200 economies. Now, what key strategies have allowed China to expand its global trade footprint so rapidly and effectively?
First of all, ever since 1978, when China started the reform and opening to the outside world, China has always been emphasizing for its own benefit as well as for the benefit of people throughout the world that development is the hard truth. Mm-hmm. So China pursues development at all costs. China attaches great importance to domestic stability and keeping peace abroad in order to really create the best environment for development. And we put a premium on modernization in agriculture, industry, science and technology, and national defense. And now we put a premium on what we call new qualitative productivity, which means productivity to be achieved by focusing on scientific and technological breakthroughs. So this is the underlying principle supporting all initiatives in China, political initiative, economic initiative, as well as climate change initiatives, you name it. Mm-hmm. And it also explains the policy of pursuing peace throughout the world. So I hope the rest of the world can also go along with China in emphasizing that development should be the hard truth rather than, for example, choosing plunder or economic exploitation or domination above and over all the other countries as the top priority of any state.
Mr. Fakude, South Africa, along with Libya, Algeria and Tunisia, faces some of the highest tariffs under the new U.S. policy. Now, meanwhile, China has announced plans to eliminate tariffs on all imports from African countries with diplomatic ties. Now, does this signal an opportunity to deepen China-South Africa trade relations? And if so, in which sectors or products could cooperation be expanded?
Indeed, it does. I think the attitude of the United States and its tariff trades, which are likely, of course, to backlash in the United States, because at some point in the value chain, someone has to absorb the cost, and it ultimately is going to be the consumer that's going to suffer as a result, because the prices are going to impact the retail prices eventually. So I think these high tariff costs, especially between those that are imposed in the countries that we've just mentioned, including Libya, Tunisia, and Algeria, will push these countries towards the biggest consumer at the moment, which is China. There's no doubt about it. But that is also going to have an impact on the politics and diplomatic relations between these countries and China. You're likely to see the strengthening thereof. And we, of course, South Africa is being punished not because of any adverse and exploitative economic posture towards the United States, simply because of our politics, which mainly has been about condemning the genocide that's continuing in Gaza. And we've also been accused of having too close relationship with China and Iran. So it's political, and they're using an economic tool to punish us for our own independent positions, which are guided by morality. So that's why you're going to have this situation continue.
All right. Professor Gao, how have the U.S. tariffs influenced the global trade landscape, particularly for developing countries in Africa? And do these shifts create new opportunities for Africa and China cooperation in trade and investment? How does it look from China's side?
Thank you very much. You are raising a very important question. I think the anti-the-world tariff war launched by the United States against the rest of the countries, as well as, in particular, the anti-China tariff war launched by the United States against China, are disrupting international trade as we understand it. It's undermining, if not significantly eroding, the confidence in free trade. Now, this is particularly bad because the United States is actually keeping its currency dominance while trying to destroy free trade in the name of moving manufacturing jobs back to the United States. In reality, if a country wants to keep its currency as a dominant currency in the world, by logic, it will need to sustain a trade deficit rather than balance the trade or even a surplus in trade with the rest of the world. So I think they either need to abandon its US dollar dominance and encourage more manufacturing jobs back in the United States, or they need to keep the trade deficit while keeping the US dollar dominance, or, for example, figure out what's the best interest for the United States as well as for the world. We are already living in a highly integrated and mutually connected world, and no country should be allowed to disrupt international order, as what the United States is doing by launching this unprecedented, largest scale in terms of history, for more than 100 years, such a large, massive tariff war against the rest of the world, and in particular against China. So China stands firm to defend free trade for its own benefit, but more importantly, for the benefit of all the countries involved, and ironically, for the benefit of the majority of the people in the United States. Because I truly believe the American people do not want to pay the tariffs collected by the US government in the name that other countries will pay the tariffs. No, other countries will not pay the tariff. The people who will pay the tariff are the American consumers. It's kind of like on the American people. So I hope President Trump and his government will have the decency to tell the American people that the huge amount of tariffs they keep talking about are eventually to be paid by the American people while disrupting international trade for the detriment for everyone involved in the world of today.
And still on you, Professor Gao, in light of shifting global trade dynamics, where do you see the greatest potential for China-Africa collaboration in areas like green development, digital trade, or industrial innovation?
Well, I think while the United States is engaged in this massive, largest scale, unprecedented tariff war against the rest of the world, including against Africa, China is eliminating any tariff in its trade with African countries, with all the countries which have established the diplomatic relations. This is truly a very important blessing, because the African countries now suffering from the maximum pressure from the United States in raising the tariffs will be kind of appreciative that China is eliminating all the tariffs to encourage more export by African countries to China. I recently attended an announcement which heralds in the 8th annual session of China International Import Expo. China is the only country in the world today to host such a large-scale import expo to encourage all countries in the world to showcase their export items for the massive Chinese market. So this is really good timing, and the rest of the world should appreciate that while the United States is maximum pressuring other countries, China is opening its door as wide as possible to welcome products from different parts of the world for the consumers in China.
Mr. Fakote, with growing uncertainty around the future of AGOA, what would be the broader implications for South Africa and the region if preferential access to the US markets were withdrawn?
Well, I think there's no future for AGOA. I'm not even sure whether the president even knew that there was something called AGOA, because if he knew, he would have talked about it when he implemented these tariffs. I doubt if he's aware of something called AGOA, actually. So I don't see any future. And AGOA is out the window. The fact that all of these countries, including ourselves, are slapped with 30% and others 25, etc. It did not take that into consideration. And this is a problem. It's a problem of an ignorant president who doesn't even know the bilaterals that are in place between countries and the United States. And of course, one hopes that we're not going to repeat the same mistake of making a U-turn from the economic course that has been dictated and forced upon us to go back and deal with the United States, because it has shown to be an unreliable partner, which could in future jeopardize not only our economies, but also our politics. So there's no future for AGOA. AGOA is out the window. The tariffs were implemented on the first. Yes, other countries in Africa are still negotiating. But there's no AGOA and there's no future for AGOA. And I think the African countries will be foolhardy if they go back to the drawing board in terms of resuscitating this dead body. No, go back to try and establish any sort of long-term economic cooperation with the United States. I think we should look at our new partners moving forward. And in this regard, I'm specifically referring to China in terms of doing business, because all of us have to feed our families and make sure that our people are employed. And there is a future stability, so that in future stability, as Professor Gao says, development leads to political stability and peace. And without that, if you're going to be entering into arrangement with schizophrenic politicians and leaders, you're likely to have a problem that's going to be perpetuated, and African people are going to be the ones that are going to be impacted by these decisions.
Mr. Kobeli, just to wind off our discussion, with the US becoming a less predictable trade partner, are you exploring new markets or partnerships to diversify risk and sustain growth?
As you know, US, by and large, it has been a very good market. It's a dollar-based market. It's a mass buyer. They buy big quantities and then they make us create more jobs for our economies. Nevertheless, being unpredictable like they are, now it is also an opportunity for the African continental trade agreement to be considered as another thing that we have to make sure that is resuscitated and then is taken into account by the member states, the member manufacturers. We have to come back together as players, as stakeholders, and then look at what is it that we are strong in. Look at our markets, because it doesn't mean that Africa is not a market. It's a very big market. It's just that we have been depending in importing more than for ourselves. So basically, this was just like a wake-up call, or I can call it, is saying to us, guys, look around yourself, trade amongst yourself, look at other strategies that you can put in place, so much that you are self-sustained.
Gentlemen, that brings us to the end of this discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Listeners, you can subscribe to our online newsletter on CGTN or Substack to get more insights on China-Africa relations. Just search China-Africa Talk. For now, it's goodbye. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others. Post it on social media or leave a rating and review. Thanks again. See you next time.